As the king and queen left the thrones and exited Westminster Abbey, every person present bowed and curtsied to the monarchs. No one moved when Camilla passed. The memorial dinner had been intended to honor Queen Elizabeth II, the beloved former head of the monarchy. Instead, a single furious sentence shattered the silence inside Windsor Castle. Sophie sat trembling, tears gathering in her eyes. Camilla remained standing, visibly enraged. Then Anne pushed back her chair, rose before the entire table, and issued an order no one expected. The dinner was over. Stopping the evening would have exposed something far more painful than an argument. Before going deeper into what this means for the royal family, here is a quick reminder. Subscribe so you do not miss a single update. Senior royals and aides had gathered for a closed family meal honoring Queen Elizabeth II, the former head of the monarchy. The occasion was meant to protect her memory from rivalry. Sophie carried its emotional burden. The Duchess of Edinburgh had been chosen to deliver the tribute because the late queen had trusted her deeply. Anne had approved that choice. Before the guests entered, she found Sophie gripping her pages too tightly and told her, "You were chosen because you knew her heart." The reassurance steadied the trusted confidant. When she rose and began speaking about loyalty, kindness, and duty without praise, Camilla cut across her words. The queen consort accused her of turning a sacred family remembrance into a performance about herself. Sophie tried to continue. Her hands shook, yet she forced out another sentence. Camilla interrupted, asking whether she had ever understood the burden of the crown. The attack broke something. The Duchess lowered her pages, covered her mouth, and began crying before the family. Anne watched the humiliation unfold, and her expression hardened. Then her chair scraped against the floor. Anne rose and declared, "This dinner ends now." The Princess Royal ordered arriving staff to stop at the doors and instructed every guest to leave without speech. Camilla demanded to know what gave her that authority, but the king did not answer. Charles remained seated, staring at a sealed folder beside his glass, while Sophie struggled to regain control. A private secretary, a senior aide handling royal business, recorded the interruption and Anne's command in the official event log, the household's written record of important decisions and incidents. That documented account revealed the clash had not begun at dinner. It concerned a disputed memorial instruction hidden inside Charles's folder. The meal was over, but the confrontation was beginning, because everyone at that table carried a different claim to the late queen's legacy. Behind the outburst were three women whose relationships with the monarchy could not have been more different. Anne had guarded her mother's wishes with almost military discipline. Sophie had earned the late sovereign's trust quietly, without demanding attention. Camilla had fought for recognition inside an institution that once resisted her presence. At Windsor, those histories collided, and Sophie's tears revealed just how personal the struggle had become. Anne viewed the memorial as a final promise to her mother. The Princess Royal had spent decades serving without complaint, and she refused to let remembrance become a contest for attention. This was not an ordinary royal engagement, it was a private act of love. For Anne, protecting its dignity meant protecting the late queen's final wishes. Sophie carried a different weight. Queen Elizabeth II had welcomed her during private visits, shared carriage journeys, and painful conversations after Prince Philip's death. The late Duke had been the monarch's husband and closest companion, and losing him had left her deeply isolated. The Duchess of Edinburgh had offered comfort without seeking praise. That was why delivering the tribute felt like service, not honor. Sophie confessed her fear before entering the dining room. She told Edward that reading the late Queen's private words felt almost too personal, as though she were opening a door that should remain closed. Her husband squeezed her hand and reminded her that Anne had made the choice carefully. The Duke of Edinburgh then promised to remain close. Yet neither of them understood how strongly Camilla resented that choice. Camilla had expected to lead the remembrance. The Queen Consort saw Sophie's place in the printed speaking order as a public challenge to her authority. That order was simply the planned sequence of speeches, but its meaning cut much deeper. The trusted confidant had been placed at the emotional center, while Camilla believed she had been pushed to the edge. Anne had already sensed the danger. According to a documented planning note written by the memorial secretary, she warned Camilla that Sophie's position came from a sealed instruction, a protected written direction left for the family, not from personal preference. The princess refused to display it before dinner because its contents were intimate. Her silence, however, only sharpened the Queen Consort's suspicion. Charles knew the document was genuine. The king had read it that morning, closed the folder without comment, and ordered it placed beside him at dinner if authority was challenged. The argument had therefore begun long before Sophie stood to speak. To understand why one tribute provoked such fury, the story must return to the afternoon encounter. Everyone later called it the point of no return. Hours before the dinner, an argument unfolded beside the memorial chapel with no cameras and almost no witnesses. A handwritten instruction had been placed inside the ceremonial program. Camilla wanted it removed. Sophie refused to touch it. Anne arrived just as the disagreement sharpened, and one sentence changed the atmosphere completely. From that instant, the evening was no longer about remembrance. It had become a contest over who could speak for the dead. Sophie had entered St. George's Chapel, expecting a quiet rehearsal. The historic Royal Chapel is a place of worship inside Windsor Castle, used for major services and family ceremonies. Beside her stood a senior household secretary, an official responsible for organizing private royal events. Together, they checked the ceremonial program, the printed booklet guiding the memorial. Anne inspected the seating plan nearby, while Camilla arrived, expecting to approve the final order. Sophie found the disputed message inside that program. Queen Elizabeth II had written it by hand after one of the family's most painful periods, thanking the trusted confidant for bringing steadiness and kindness when grief had weakened everyone around her. The late sovereign had also requested that she lead a future private remembrance. Those words mattered because they turned a simple speech into a personal duty that Sophie could not surrender. Camilla read the reproduced message twice. Then she told Sophie that publishing such intimate praise would make the tribute appear arranged to increase her importance. The Queen Consort insisted that private affection should remain private. Yet the Duchess did not raise her voice. She calmly answered that removing the message would mean ignoring the recorded wish of a monarch who was no longer alive to defend it. Anne entered as Camilla placed the program firmly on the table. The Queen Consort declared that no family member should use personal affection to gain prominence within the monarchy. Sophie's face changed instantly, but she remained silent. The Princess Royal saw the hurt and asked the secretary whether the wording matched the approved copy. When the official confirmed that it did, she ordered that not one word be removed. The warning came next. Camilla said the matter was not settled and walked toward the door. Anne replied that her mother had already settled it. A planning minute, a written record of decisions made during official preparations, documented the objection, Sophie's refusal, and the princess's command to preserve the tribute exactly as authorized. That account later proved the dinner explosion had begun inside the chapel. Anne carried one more safeguard. Without informing Camilla, she placed a second copy of the sealed instruction inside Charles's folder before the guests assembled. If the tribute were challenged, the evidence would be waiting. When the dining room doors later closed, the princess was no longer merely protecting Sophie. She was preparing to confront the woman who had challenged her mother's final written choice. The guests had barely cleared the corridor when Anne turned back toward the silent table. Sophie remained near the doorway, wiping her face as Edward stood protectively beside her. Camilla demanded that the dinner resume. The Princess Royal refused. Then she removed the sealed instruction from the king's folder, placed it between them, and challenged the queen consort to deny the words written inside. The confrontation had finally become impossible to contain. Anne ordered every non-family member to leave except the private secretary responsible for the event record. That official account was the household's written record of important words, actions, and decisions. The princess wanted the confrontation documented, but she refused to let it become entertainment for a corridor filled with whispering staff. When the doors closed, the secretary opened his notebook. Everything said from that moment would remain preserved. Charles stayed at the head of the table. The king said nothing as Sophie struggled to steady herself, and Edward remained close beside her. His silence mattered because both Anne and Camilla understood the truth. Only the monarch could turn this family confrontation into a lasting royal decision. Every passing second increased the pressure. He would eventually have to defend his wife, his sister, or his mother's recorded wish. Camilla struck first. She accused Anne of humiliating her before the household and using the cancelled dinner to challenge her place beside Charles. The princess answered without raising her voice. She said the humiliation belonged to Sophie, whose tribute had been destroyed while she was honoring someone she loved. Rank could not change that truth. Anger could not erase it, and silence would not hide it. Sophie tried to intervene, but her voice broke again. Edward stepped forward and told Camilla that reducing his wife to tears could not be defended as protocol, the rules governing formal royal behavior. The Duke said no tradition demanded cruelty during a memorial. The trusted confidant touched his arm, asking him to stop. Yet the pain in her face said everything he had been unable to soften. Anne opened the folder. She read the decisive instructions slowly. Sophie was to deliver the family remembrance in full, while the monarch's eldest daughter was entrusted with protecting the occasion's integrity. Camilla reached toward the page, but the princess placed her palm over it. She declared that the original would remain inside the private archive, the secure collection where sensitive family records were protected. Charles finally spoke. He confirmed that he had authenticated the handwriting, meaning he had formally verified it as genuine before dinner. Camilla withdrew her hand. The argument over the document was finished, but the crisis was not. The emotional battle had been won at the table. The struggle over authority was moving behind a closed door where the king alone would decide the consequences. Charles entered his private study, carrying the folder that had silenced the room. He did not summon a council or seek a public statement. Instead, he sat alone beneath the weight of two competing duties: protecting his wife and defending his mother's final instruction. When Anne joined him, she did not demand punishment. She asked one question: whether royal rank could excuse cruelty committed in the name of authority. Charles held final responsibility because he had hosted the memorial as both son and sovereign. He had also appointed Anne as chair of the Private Family Remembrance Committee. The small group trusted to protect the purpose and dignity of the occasion. That written appointment gave the princess authority to suspend the dinner if anyone's behavior threatened its meaning. Her command had not been impulsive. It had been firm, deliberate, and valid. Charles opened the event log and read it twice. The king stopped at the sentence describing Sophie lowering her tribute as tears overtook her. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the report, and remained silent. The record mattered because it captured the exact words spoken at the table. It also prevented anger, loyalty, or palace pressure from quietly changing what had happened. Anne watched her brother's face before speaking. She told him that protecting Camilla from embarrassment could not require Sophie to carry the injury alone. The princess did not ask him to choose between his wife and his sister. She asked him to choose between appearance and accountability. Loyalty to the crown, she insisted, meant correcting harm inside their family before demanding respect from anyone outside it. Charles reached for his pen. He signed a private directive, a written royal instruction intended for a limited group, confirming that the memorial dinner would remain cancelled. The monarch also removed Camilla from every remaining planning decision. Sophie's original tribute would be protected and delivered at another gathering without edits, designed to reduce its meaning or hide why the first attempt had failed. Charles added one final condition. The Queen Consort would apologize directly, with no aids, prepared statements, or negotiated wording. Palace communications, the staff responsible for official royal messages, would not transform a personal wound into polished language about misunderstanding. The king wanted honesty, not protection. He wanted Camilla to face the woman she had reduced to tears and acknowledge the damage without an institution speaking for her. Camilla received the directive in silence. She read the signature, folded the page once, and dismissed her staff. Then the Queen Consort remained alone, as the consequences finally became real. The signature settled who held authority, but it could not erase what had happened, and the first shockwaves would spread through Windsor before its corridors fell silent. By midnight, the abandoned dining room had been cleared, but the emotional wreckage remained. Sophie sat inside a small drawing room with the unread tribute resting across her knees. Anne stood nearby, furious with herself for not intervening sooner. Elsewhere, Camilla read the king's directive in solitude. No shouting followed. No dramatic denial came. The silence was more devastating because each woman now understood exactly what the night had cost. Household staff removed the memorial place settings without serving the final course. The unfinished program and Sophie's folded speech were secured beside the official incident record instead of being discarded. That record preserved the exact sequence of the confrontation for senior palace officials. The decision mattered because nothing could now be quietly rewritten as a harmless disagreement. The tears, the outburst, and Anne's order had become part of the documented account. Charles instructed palace communications to confirm only that the private dinner had ended early. The king prohibited his staff from blaming illness, a scheduling problem, or a false security concern. Such explanations might have protected the family's public image, but they would also have erased what Sophie endured. The monarch refused to create a lie merely because the truth had become uncomfortable inside Windsor. Sophie finally spoke to Edward. She feared that her bond with the late queen had become a weapon in another person's fight for position. The trusted confidant wondered whether accepting the tribute had brought fresh conflict into a night meant for healing. Her husband rejected that fear. The Duke told her that refusing to abandon the monarch's words had honored the relationship rather than exploited it. Anne moved closer and apologized. The princess admitted that she should have stopped the confrontation before Sophie's voice broke. She had known tension existed, yet she believed Camilla would respect the purpose of the gathering. The Duchess answered that Anne had been the only person willing to end the humiliation. That choice had not saved the dinner, but it had saved her from being forced to suffer silently. Camilla made her own decision. Before Charles requested it, she removed her name from the following morning's memorial service, a formal gathering held to honor someone who has died. The Queen Consort crossed out her place by hand and returned the schedule without comment. That small act revealed she understood the king's restriction was real, not symbolic. A copy of the event log soon reached Charles's senior secretary, making an internal cover-up impossible. The written account showed Camilla's precise words, Anne's intervention, and the directive that followed. Yet, before the record could escape the palace, the princess asked Sophie to meet privately at dawn. The institution had recorded the damage, but only 2 wounded women could decide what came next. At dawn, Sophie found Anne waiting in a small Windsor sitting room with 2 untouched cups of tea. There were no aids, no official folders, and no ceremonial roles to hide behind. The princess asked whether the tribute should be cancelled permanently. Sophie looked down at the pages that had reduced her to tears only hours earlier. Then she made the decision that transformed humiliation into strength. She would finish what she had begun. Anne had arranged the private meeting because she wanted an answer untouched by family rank or institutional pressure. The princess made one promise immediately. No royal duty required Sophie to return to the memorial program. That program was the planned order of readings and tributes honoring the late queen. If the Duchess walked away, nobody would call it failure. She had already endured more than the occasion should ever have demanded. Sophie placed the original tribute between them. The final paragraph, which she had never reached, described service as the courage to remain gentle when others mistake gentleness for weakness. Those words mattered because Queen Elizabeth II had lived by that belief. They also cut painfully close to what had happened. The trusted confidant had been attacked for the quiet loyalty that once earned the monarch's affection. Sophie then admitted her deepest fear. Camilla's accusation had made her wonder whether others believed her closeness to the late queen was a calculated path toward influence. A private written account preserved by the household secretary later documented that confession. The Duchess said she could survive anger, but she could not bear the idea that years of genuine affection might be reduced to ambition. Anne rejected that fear without hesitation. She told Sophie that grief did not belong to the highest-ranking person in a room. The princess said her mother had trusted the quietest people because they rarely demanded recognition. Refusing to compete for attention was not weakness, it was the very quality the late sovereign had valued, and surrendering now would allow Camilla's words to define a relationship they had no right to rewrite. Sophie made her choice. She would deliver the tribute that afternoon at a smaller family remembrance, a private gathering focused on memory rather than ceremony. There would be no banquet and no formal seating hierarchy, meaning nobody would be placed according to royal rank. Anne would remain beside her, but the Duchess would speak alone. This time, nobody would take the moment away from her. Sophie accepted one final condition. She would meet Camilla privately before the gathering and listen to an honest apology, but she would reject words prepared by secretaries. The queen consort would have to speak for herself. As Anne and the trusted confidant left the room, news of the halted dinner escaped Windsor. She had recovered her voice inside the palace. Beyond its gates, the public was about to judge what that intervention meant. By midday, the secret was no longer contained. A newspaper appeared with 4 words dominating its front page and stopped it for Sophie. Beneath the headline was an image of the Princess Royal, leaving Windsor with a rigid expression. While the Duchess departed separately with reddened eyes, the country did not see a disagreement over protocol. It saw one woman publicly protected after another had been pushed beyond endurance. Broadcasters rebuilt the evening from 3 confirmed details: the dinner's sudden cancellation, the revised memorial schedule, and the palace statement acknowledging Anne's authority as chair. That role meant she led the small family group responsible for protecting the remembrance. The reports mattered because they showed her intervention was not an angry interruption without authority. The princess had exercised a responsibility formally given to her before the gathering began. Charles approved every word of the palace statement himself. The announcement confirmed that Sophie's tribute would proceed privately and that she retained the late queen's written confidence. It avoided the outburst's precise language, but it did not deny the emotional harm. The king understood that silence could appear protective of Camilla. By confirming the tribute, the monarch made clear whose role would continue and whose influence had been restricted. Edward watched the first broadcast beside his wife. He immediately turned down the television when a commentator described her as the weeping Duchess. Sophie did not want pity, and she feared the public spectacle would bury the woman they had gathered to honor. The Duke reminded her that tears were not the end of the story. She was still going to finish the tribute, and that choice mattered more than the humiliation. Anne telephoned within minutes. The princess told Sophie that one headline could not define her service, her loyalty, or her bond with the late monarch. She promised that the afternoon tribute, not the broken speech at dinner, would become the final emotional image. The trusted confidant listened, steadied herself, and returned to the pages she had nearly decided never to read again. A small crowd gathered outside Windsor's Henry V gate. People placed white roses near the entrance, and one handwritten card carried a simple message: "Kindness is not weakness." A broadcaster repeated those words during live coverage, framing the crisis as a test of modern royal authority. Would the monarchy protect rank, or would it protect dignity? Charles's signed directive had already provided the palace's answer. Camilla heard that verdict before entering the private room. No staff accompanied her, and no prepared statement waited in her hand. The queen consort understood that Sophie would accept only words spoken honestly. Public judgment had arrived swiftly, but the story could end only when the woman who caused the wound confronted the woman forced to carry it. There was no audience when Camilla apologized. No secretary supplied the words, and no camera softened the discomfort. Sophie listened without interrupting, as the queen consort admitted that jealousy and fear had turned a memorial into a contest. The apology could not undo the tears, but it acknowledged their cause. Hours later, the Duchess stood beside Anne and completed the tribute. This time, nobody interrupted, and the silence afterward belonged entirely to remembrance. Camilla had entered the private room before the smaller memorial gathering, an intimate family event held without the formal ceremony of the cancelled dinner. She accepted responsibility for questioning Sophie's motives and admitted that royal rank had not given her ownership over the family's grief. So the trusted confidant later preserved those words in a private written account secured by the household, ensuring that the apology and its meaning could not be rewritten. Sophie accepted the apology, but she refused to pretend that trust had been instantly restored. The Duchess told Camilla that forgiveness could begin only through changed conduct. Carefully spoken regret was not enough. The queen consort would have to respect the late monarch's instruction and stop treating affection as a form of competition. She agreed, knowing the consequence would reach beyond that private room. Camilla withdrew from memorial planning for the rest of the season and did not attend the afternoon tribute. Charles accepted her withdrawal as a fair consequence rather than a public banishment. The king understood that accountability did not require humiliation. It required a clear boundary. His wife would retain her place within the family, but she would no longer control an occasion whose purpose she had damaged. Anne stood beside Sophie when the tribute began again. The princess remained silent as the trusted confidant returned to the paragraph where her voice had failed. She did not interrupt, explain, or claim credit for protecting her. This moment belonged to the woman who had been wounded. Sophie read every unfinished word, proving that quiet strength could survive even the most painful attempt to silence it. Sophie finished with the late queen's message about steadiness and kindness. Edward took her hand, and the Duke remained beside her as Charles bowed his head. Anne finally allowed her stern expression to soften. The original dinner was never resumed. Its cancellation remained on the official record alongside the king's directive, Camilla's withdrawal, and the completed tribute. Anne's intervention created a lasting boundary. Royal unity would no longer be protected by forcing the wounded person into silence. Sophie left with her dignity restored. Camilla faced a real consequence, and Charles upheld his mother's wish. The monarchy survived because it chose accountability over appearances. The memorial began with an outburst and ended with a verdict. Dignity mattered more than rank. Kindness was not weakness, and silence would never again be mistaken for unity. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.